In our second video program, we saw that cyclic motion is one of the fundamental laws in the cosmos. In this program, we will explore another of these fundamental laws, namely evolution, which, according to the Theosophical Philosophy, is part of a continuing and dynamic process pervading the universe. The Theosophical worldview embodies what might be called a vision of progressive evolution and human self-transformation. It regards the process of evolution as the continual unfolding of an underlying and unifying, all-embracing consciousness or divine principle, which manifests in the incredible variety of forms and movement which we perceive in the universe around us.
The theosophical view is that all nature, with its immense span of evolution from stars to dandelions, is the outer expression of the one all-pervading ground of being. This one life, or divine principle, is inherent in every particle of matter. It is the great guiding intelligence behind nature's processes. The beautiful order found in the chambered nautilus, in the spiral galaxy, in the symmetries of crystals, in the perfectly timed sequential development of the embryo. These are all reflections of the order and intelligence of the one life within nature. According to Theosophy, this unseen life principle with its infinite potential is unfolding and expressing its potentiality in the world through evolution. All nature is the ever-changing appearance of the inexhaustible creative possibilities of the life within.
From a scientific point of view, it had been noted by the well-known evolutionary theorist Ernest Mayr that the most consequential change in man's view of the world, of living nature, and of himself came with the introduction of the idea of change itself, of change over long periods of time, in a word, of evolution.
Charles Darwin, in his revolutionary scientific work, The Origin of Species, which was published in 1859, was so impressed by this concept of progressive change and its sweeping implications that he was moved to conclude his book by stating, "There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that, while this planet has gone cycling on from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." Helena Blavatsky, writing in the late 1800s, proved to be ahead of her time in many respects. She drew from all available sources, including the science of her day, as well as the religious, philosophical, intellectual, and esoteric traditions. She attempted to bring them together, and in so doing, focus their collective light in such a way that a more complete picture of the unity of man and universe could be glimpsed. Of evolution, she had this to say.
Modern science insists upon the doctrine of evolution. So do human reason and the secret doctrine. What is evolution? Webster defined it as the act of unfolding, the process of growth, development, as the evolution of a flower from a bud or an animal from the egg. Yet the bud must be traced through its parent plant to the seed, and the egg to the animal or bird that laid it, and to the speck of protoplasm from which it expanded and grew. And both the seed and the speck must have the latent potentialities in them for reproduction and gradual development. The unfolding of the 1,001 forms or phases of evolution through which they must pass before the flower or the animal are fully developed. Hence the future plan must be there.
If we look today at Webster's dictionary, we will find the definition surprisingly consistent with that recorded by H.P.B. A series of related changes in a certain direction, unfolding, movement, transformation. But, given this description of evolution, we might well wish to ask, what is it that is unfolding, moving? What is it that is undergoing transformation? And in what direction does this transformation lead? The attempt to answer these questions forms a key part of theosophical literature, which suggests that the universe is worked and guided from within outwards.
It is postulated that the one reality is behind and within all nature, giving it the impulse to grow, develop, reproduce itself. A unitary creative fountain from which the prolific variety of forms arises. It is through the evolutionary process that the one breaks forth into these countless forms and substances. But it can be observed that, in this infinity of relationships, all parts tend to join together to form harmonious wholes.
The ideas contained in Darwin's Origin of Species generated a lively controversy between the so-called scientific materialists and the Christian fundamentalists of the day regarding evolution and man's place in the scheme of the universe. H.P.B.'s stand in this controversy was unique in that, unlike the fundamentalists, she did not entirely reject Darwin's work. However, unlike the materialists, she insisted that he had omitted a vital part of the evolutionary picture by focusing exclusively on its physical aspect. Her basic argument was that Darwin had omitted the elements of an underlying intelligence and spirituality, purpose and transcendence. In short, he had omitted consciousness.
Esoteric philosophy teaches that everything lives and is conscious, but not that all life and consciousness are similar to those of human or even animal beings. We look upon life as the one form of existence manifesting in what we call matter, or as what in man we name spirit, soul, and matter, incorrectly separating them. Matter is the vehicle for the manifestation of soul on this plane of existence. and soul is the vehicle on a higher plane for the manifestation of spirit. These three are a trinity synthesized by life, which pervades them all.
Both science and theosophy view evolution as the process by which the universe has reached its present stage of becoming. But theosophy adds a previous cycle, involution, to that of evolution. Returning once again to Webster to help us form a clearer idea of what is meant by involution, we find it defined as the act or an instance of infolding or entangling, involvement, envelopment. A relation of a higher type of reality to a lower type, as mind to matter, upon which it depends. In this dynamic universe, a book written by scientists with a theosophical perspective, the cyclic process of involution, evolution, is examined in the light of both scientific knowledge and theosophical teachings. They describe this process as follows.
In terms of consciousness, when the spirit, which is essentially eternal and immortal, identifies itself with the transitory and temporal worlds of phenomena, this is involution. The very nature of this identification is a bondage to the rhythm of time and changeableness and impermanence. If we accept the theosophical hypothesis of the involutionary origin of matter, in which primordial energy, guided by universal intelligence, is gradually involved into the systems we call physical atoms, we may see why the universe as a whole, from its most distant galaxies to the simplest electron, behaves with the apparent intelligence and beauty of design. We may also see that the process we call evolution is the subsequent normal unfolding of growth in a vast, universal organism. Gradually, the self, which is free, permanent, and beyond change, learns to cease its identification with the phenomenal worlds by an ever-increasing self-realization and self-determination as the powers of the spirit become more fully expressed. This is the evolutionary phase of the cosmic process.
In the language of symbol and analogy with which great spiritual truths have been taught through the ages, we read in the Secret Doctrine that the lotus is a very ancient and favorite simile for the cosmos itself, and also for man. The popular reasons given are, first, that the lotus seed contains within itself a perfect miniature of the future plant, which typifies the fact that the spiritual prototypes of all things exist in the immaterial world before those things become materialized on earth. Second, the fact that the lotus plant grows up through the water with its roots in the mud and spreads its flower in the air above. The lotus thus typifies the life of man and also that of the cosmos. For the Secret Doctrine teaches that the elements of both are the same and that both are developing in the same direction. The root of the lotus sunk in the mud represents material life. The stalk passing up through the water typifies existence in the astral world. And the flower floating on the water and opening to the sky is emblematic of spiritual being.
Life indeed both precedes form and survives it. When we say a thing dies, we mean only that a particular mode of life has withdrawn or ceased to manifest. But its ceasing to manifest no more means that the life has ceased to be than the water of a dewdrop ceases to be when it evaporates in the sunlight. Life is no mere function of physical bodies, but is something transcendent and immortal.
In The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky outlines the concept of evolution from the theosophical point of view. In Volume 1, Cosmogenesis, she writes, "It now becomes plain that there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme, or rather three separate schemes of evolution, which in our system are inextricably interwoven and interblended. These are the monadic or spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical evolutions. Each of these three systems has its own laws. Each is represented in the constitution of man, and it is the union of these three streams which makes him the complex being he now is."
In this program, we have looked at and briefly discussed both the spiritual and the physical streams or aspects of man and nature. Now we will focus on the intellectual aspect or mind principle. In theosophical literature, this principle is also known as manas. To begin with, we find that contemporary science, spurred on by the progressive advances and explorations in physics, has only recently begun to consider the field of consciousness and consciousness research. On the leading edge of such thought, one scientist, Eric Jansch, speculates.
It becomes possible to view evolution as a complex but holistic, dynamic phenomenon of a universal unfolding of order, which becomes manifest in many ways, as matter and energy, information and complexity, consciousness and self-reflection. Above all, however, it may be understood as the evolution of consciousness and as the evolution of the mind. Self-transcendence, the evolution of evolutionary processes, is this evolution of the mind.
The significance of this principle of mind, or manas, has long been emphasized in theosophical thought. The evolution of the mind or intellect, the second scheme described by Madame Blavatsky, is manas at work in the world. In The Divine Plan, an exposition of the Secret Doctrine, Jeffrey Barborka underscores its importance once again by pointing out its implications for the development of the human race.
By intellectual is meant the functioning of the mind principle, manas, its awakenment, and the consequent spurring on of human evolution, without which man would have continued in somnolence for uncounted ages. It is because of this factor that man is able to hasten or retard his own evolutionary advancement. The choice rests with man alone. although he is bound to follow the circle of necessity. The second scheme of evolution, dealing with mental enlightenment for the human race, represents the pivotal point in the whole scheme of man's career upon earth. Without any doubt, it is the most important factor regarding man's development on this globe.
On the frontiers of science, there are those who also seek to describe and explain, to understand the profound, unifying, driving force which seems to impel all life forward, providing the impetus for our evolutionary journey.
Meaning becomes the moving force of self-transcendence. It emerges from a sense of connectedness. The need for meaning proves to be a powerful factor in the evolution of mankind and of the universe. This connectedness of our own life process with the dynamics of an all-embracing universe has so far been accessible only to the mystic experience.
Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting on, both we and the things belonging to that plane are for the time being our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing with it the idea that now at last we have reached reality. But only when we have reached that absolute consciousness and blended our own with it shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya.
The Theosophical worldview is based on an ancient tradition which maintains and teaches a vision of human self-transformation and self-transcendence. In The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky has stated that the one reality is the field of absolute consciousness. Evolution is the unfolding of that one reality, a unitary and unifying consciousness. Every living being, from atom to galaxy, is rooted in the same universal, life-creating reality. The universe and all that exists within it are truly one, interrelated, and interdependent whole.